Hello there, you're watching Round Table. Britain now has its first South Asian Prime Minister. But unlike Barack Obama, for example, who was elected by the people, Rishi Sunak was crowned by his parliamentary colleagues. Some South Asians in the UK celebrated the news, calling it a Diwali gift, while others argue that he represents the elite and not them. So is it a win for people of colour? Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Rishi Sunak has become one of the richest ever occupants of number 10 Downing Street. The net worth of him and his wife, Akshata Murthy, is estimated to be in the region of $837 million, making him richer than King Charles III.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
Sunak has previously voted for stronger immigration and asylum rules, promising to expand the government's controversial Rwanda immigration policy. Does Rishi's wealth and Tory politics actually mean he's far less representative of British South Asians? OK, we start in the studio with Shareefa Energy, activist and poet. We go to Luton in the UK and say hello to Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst and writer, and in London, Samayya Afzal, anti-racist activist. Great to have you all on the show. It is certainly a talking point, isn't it? And you wrote, Shareefa, here comes the representation politics apologist nonsense waffle. Give the guy a chance.
Well, I personally think across the board, as an artist and creative, there's always like a lot of... when a lot of people of colour have come into power or taken certain positions, I always feel like everyone jumps to be excited to celebrate them. But I'm like, look at what they represent. For me, it's about what type of a human you are. It's about what kind of, what your ethics are, what you're bringing to the table, what's better in society. For me, I'm not just going to get behind someone just because they've got the same skin colour as me.
Have you examined his ethics?
Yes, I have.
OK, he comes from a fairly humble background, as does his multimillionaire wife. Her father taught her to clean the toilet, which is what lower caste people are made to do in India, just to set them an example of how they must not build themselves up. He's a good constituency MP. The poorer people in Richmond and Yorkshire talk well of him. What don't you seem to like about him?
I just personally don't like just the reality of him representing such a, not even just the affluent, like what he actually represents as someone who has £700 million. And that in itself, for me, is, again, someone that's so far removed from everyday society. And of course, I'm not saying even if there was like a socialist government in place or anything, I'm not saying they're going to be like working class people at all. But again, for me, it's about, even as a South Asian person, there's such a wide gap between the South Asian community. As a working class person, I'm very aware of how even just the middle class people or certain people that I know that are millionaires, how their reflections and their perspective on a lot of marginalised communities.
But you seem to just sort of put him down because he's very rich, one of the things that you just said. But this is somebody who knows him particularly well from Goa in India, known him all his life. He said, if someone has done all of this, what they've done, starting up charities, etc., and you just paper over it by saying you are just a rich kid, you are denigrating academia, you are denigrating values, you are denigrating a path of simplicity that the family's treaded on all their life. Are you not perhaps just taking advantage of the fact that he's there to get oxygen of publicity for yourself and whatever you believe in?
I don't really feel like it's about getting publicity for myself. I've got things to do. But at the same time, I do believe, like someone that said that he would take like any sort of little support that the working class communities have from urban areas and put it back into like more middle class areas. I think that's pathetic. Okay. We have an increase in food banks from all members of marginalised communities that are accessing, and that's just going up and up. And I feel like if someone's not interested in supporting the very poor, the very marginalised, the fact even in Leicester, from where I'm from, the NHS staff are accessing food banks.
But once again, we have to give him a chance. So let's just wait and see. Thank you for starting that off. Now, we've got with us Rakib Ehsan, who supports Rishi and says, again, give him a chance. And you've said people who do this are South Asians with no integrity. Come back in a second once I put it to Rakib. Where is your integrity then?
I'm not particularly sure, if truth be told, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the case that I support Rishi Sunak. In fact, like Shareefa, I was very critical of the clip that emerged in the Tory leadership contest where he was defeated by Liz Truss, where he was bragging to Tory party members in Leafy, Royal Tunbridge Wells over reorganising government funding formulas to redivert funds away from supposedly overfunded.
And this is what, Shareefa, this is what
areas.
you were referring to, isn't it? Yeah.
I've criticised the Prime Minister in a number of writings on that. There's also clips of him stumbling over whether or not he had working class friends. That was a clip from his younger years. I make the point that it is a historic achievement for Britain's multiracial democracy to have its first non-white Prime Minister and its second ethnic minority Prime Minister, the first one.
Well, can I read something
Benjamin
to our
Disraeli.
viewers that you said, which is, it's a clear sign that Britain's a successful multiracial democracy where it's possible for Britons of any ethnic background to reach the highest levels of political life. You don't have to be rich. You could have done it otherwise as well.
Well, I think that there's been a great deal of emphasis on his wealth, and I think naturally social class will be talked about a great deal, especially in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I think the point that I'd make there is there has been polling before Prime Minister Sunak reached being the very top of government, which showed that the vast majority of white British voters, they would either welcome a hypothetical non-white Prime Minister, or they'd feel that it's largely irrelevant. They'd ultimately focus on matters of quality of governance and policy substance.
And Samayya, you're nodding in agreement, I take it, with what you've just heard.
Look, I think one of the key things about this is how his wealth was accrued. There is no ethical way to become a billionaire in this country, certainly probably not around the world either. If we're talking about how identity is constructed in the UK, that your social class, how a lot of that is it moves, the goalposts change. It's very easy for someone who is from may very well have humble beginnings, but has accrued wealth, has been in those circles serving the interests of wealth and capital, and then to make it into 10 Downing Street, I don't think that heralds any kind of change to the way that the system that already exists.
But let me just put it this way: this is not a couple that buys enormous yachts and goes on ostentatious holidays and has bling all around it. They've set up charitable foundations. They're helping a lot of people back in India. By all accounts, and those who know them quite well, they are quite humble.
David, they still benefited from non-dom status until it was publicized, and Rishi held American citizenship until it was recognized as well. So again, there's a great.
He didn't have citizenship. Let me get this absolutely right. He had a green card, which means you're a resident alien,
yes.
And you can have both at the same time. Because when I came back from America, I had exactly that. You don't put me in the same bracket as Rishi.
The wider discussion is more around, does your identity serve as a barrier? But I think it's a lot more than that. We can't suspend our concerns about the character, as Shareefa mentioned, but also what type of interests a government serves if, just because they happen to be from an ethnic minority background. Can we really expect it for, if at a young age he was talking about being not being in contact with working classes, for that to have improved in any way or increased in any way, as he's become a politician and then Prime Minister.
Okay,
I think.
Let me go back to Shareefa here. Are you surprised that he said, and we played the clip at the beginning, that he said he was what? This is 10 years ago, so he was just approaching 30 or thereabouts, that he had no working class friends. That doesn't mean he doesn't know anybody from the working class, because he'd been to a posh private school, he'd been to Oxbridge, he'd worked in high corporate office. The fact that he said he didn't have any working class friends doesn't mean that he doesn't know the problems.
I personally don't even think it's about how many people you know. It's like people saying, I've got black friends, but they're still very anti-black, I don't really feel like it's about association. I know people that are very rich, multi-millionaire, like millionaire Asians, but they look at us like we're some type of philanthropy project in working class communities, you know, the assimilation aspect, or like through association. So like wearing a hoodie, for me, that, you know, doesn't mean you relate to me. You've never struggled in the way that we have, or people in council flats or anything. It's not about...
Sorry, who wears the hoodie?
Rishi Sunak, there's a picture of him, and people are trying to make him look...
But surely that's the smallest point.
No.
It's the caption writer that perhaps tries to make him look ridiculous for it. The fact that he is wearing a hoodie might mean he's just got cold ears.
No, I'm not saying someone can't wear a hoodie. My point is the fact that aesthetically, it's trying to make it look like he connects to something, and people are trying to use that.
But you don't know what his motive is.
I'm not here to police people's wardrobe. People are welcome to wear what they
like.
But
you are just policing
no,
his wardrobe.
I'm not policing his
wardrobe.
wardrobe.
You're saying he's wearing it to give off a certain impression.
My point is, it's like aesthetics and associating yourself with like working class communities in Brixton, for example, when you live in Cambridge, it doesn't really make any sense to me. That's not what we're trying to achieve. It's not about association. It's about what you genuinely care about. For me, I have a genuine care about refugees and migrants and working class people and people.
And would you care just as much about them if you were a millionaire?
Probably would, but yeah,
point
of course.
Proven, surely it doesn't matter how much money you've got as long as you care.
Tell me what he's done to support the welfare of certain people. Like, what has he actually done in regards to that?
Can I play this? Mehdi Hassan, journalist I've known for many, many years, also of exactly the same background, in as much as not only was he of South Asian descent, but he went to a posh public school and he also went to Oxford. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Am I delighted that a non-white Brit of Indian descent like myself managed to become Prime Minister? Yes. Is it great for a Hindu to get the top job, and that too on Diwali? Yes. But is Rishi Sunak or the Conservative Party going to actually help minorities or people of colour or immigrants in the UK? Don't be silly.
Rakib, I'll come to you in a minute on that, but I did say to you that I would come back to you. He's not going to help non-whites. Why not?
Well, look at what's going on right now in terms of the Manson Detention Centre. Look at who his party is. Look who he brought back in. He brought back Suella Braverman after she already had a resignation. For me, when you go in to support somebody with such foul, disgusting UKIP-style policies, what she's doing, and he's fully backing her, that shows me a lot. For me, you know, you are the company you keep, and you are the team you're trying to build. So, again, you just have to look at someone like Suella Braverman, and if he wants to associate with that, that reflects a lot of what he's about.
Rakib, does it say anything that the two people we're talking about here now, Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, are both South Asians and both deemed to be of right-wing orientation, if you like? Whether that's right or not, I don't know, but that's the impression that's being kicked around out there. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think ultimately it's a matter of policy substance. For me, I think the huge focus should be on how the current government addresses the cost of living crisis, which is disproportionately impacting on lower income families with children and those with disabilities. I think that in terms of the discussion about identity, Rishi Sunak is ultimately a Conservative Prime Minister, Suella Braverman is ultimately a Conservative Home Secretary. There's, of course, discussions to be had in terms of the practicality, the morality, and the degree of ethics involved, say, in the UK-Rwanda migration partnership. But I think that a lot of the debate on what will they do for non-white people, that runs the risk of homogenizing all non-white people living in the UK. There's a great deal of diversity across the non-white population. That in itself is internally stratified by class. There will be some non-white people who will be more free market oriented. They may want a smaller state. Equally, there'll be some non-white citizens who may want an all-encompassing welfare state, and they may be more social democratic in their economic appetites. So I think we should just guard against homogenizing every single non-white person in the UK, because there's a great deal of ideological and political diversity across non-white communities in the UK.
We're going to play in some thoughts of some Hindu members of the British community here, and I'll come back and ask you about something else in just a moment. Samayya.
I think it's a very proud and historic moment for the British Indian community to have Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. It will hopefully inspire the younger generation, people from all ethnic backgrounds, that they are able to work hard and aspire to the highest office.
Samayya, your criticism of Rishi Sunak, indeed also with you, Shameera, and some of the doubts that you perhaps have, Rakib, is that because you don't associate yourself with the pride that the Hindu community is feeling because you're not Hindu?
It's almost as though I don't want to kind of dampen anyone's happiness, that the fact that they can see themselves reflected in the Prime Minister. But when it comes to really, large amounts of South Asian communities, across Bradford, across Leicester, across the UK, London, lots of different places, they may well see themselves reflected in the identity of the Prime Minister, but certainly not in his actions and the kinds of policies that he espouses. When it comes to the Rwanda policy, for example, it is widely discredited, across the board. Whether that's human rights lawyers, whether that's other politicians, whether that's community activists and anti-racist activists in particular, it's a really, really unpopular policy, even probably within the civil servants that were tasked to work on it. But given that he is this is one of the pitfalls of representation. If you just put a brown face, behind a certain policy, it's seen as though it's beneficial. The point is it's absolutely the kinds of things that he espouses, from prevent, increasing and widening the range of prevent to include extreme hatred of Britain, which we know is an ever growing vague piece of terminology that doesn't really recognize the diversity of Britain itself. But all of these things tied together, it's kind of superficial to say, well, I see myself reflected, when actually it's the actions that count. It's the policies that will show us whether Rishi Sunak is a good Prime Minister for South Asians across the UK.
And indeed for the whole of Great Britain. Can I ask you this one? Is it actually worse that he's got a brown face than if he had a white face? Might you have expected what he seems to represent to you more if he was a white middle-aged male?
I think a bad policy.
Oh,
is a
okay,
bad
sorry.
policy.
So, okay, you carry on.
I was sorry. A bad policy is a bad policy, regardless of the face behind it. I think it adds another layer of complexity when people bring in those conversations about representation. It makes it a little bit harder to have that discussion. But I certainly don't think it would be any easier to argue against the
Okay, but that is what is the basis of this programme. Why some people have said he's not effectively a true brown face representing them. Would it be more acceptable for you if these sort of policies were being put forward? Or was it more shocking that they're perhaps being espoused?
I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked. Right at the moment, there's a lot of conversations even going on around the working class Asian community. And at the same time, for me, it's just about, you packaging the policies that uphold white men and white society, but you're just doing the work for them. That's what they're doing. It's a continuation. This happened during colonialism, Britain and India and all the rest of it. There was always Indian people doing their work for them and pushing that out there. That's always been the case. For me, the concerns are when you have people being like, oh, but you've got so many Indian people in the cabinet. But you've got people like Kemi Badenoch who are saying institutional racism doesn't exist. And you've got all of the conversations happening out the Ford report. That's more of a concern to me. I'm more concerned about the fact just because there's more brown people in the cabinet, it doesn't mean we're going to have, support the United Friends of Families campaign for families of people killed by the police in Britain. It doesn't mean now a letter was just handed in on Saturday to Downing Street to demand justice for them. It don't mean Rishi Sunak's going to sit there like, oh, do you know what? I need to do my black brothers and sisters justice and make this top on my priority list. That's not really going to change. So I think
we should point out that Kemi Badenoch is not of South Asian descent.
No, of course,
East
yeah.
African.
Yeah.
She just happens to be in one of the minority groups here.
Yes, I'm very aware of that. But my point is, it's about black and brown faces in positions of power, and it doesn't mean for me, they just end up regurgitating what white middle class, upper class society have to say.
I just repeat what you wrote in your tweet. Representation politics, apologist nonsense, waffle. Surely the fact is you're just saying you just hate the Tories.
It's not necessarily about just the Tories. For me, even when people got behind Kamala Harris, for example, I had an issue with that. She's not a Tory, you know. Again, for certain areas.
And you
of
think she
policy,
falls
she's
into
more-
that same category? She's the Vice President of the United States.
Yeah, I do believe, because again, she's an apologist for a lot of things in the world.
Are
and
they
I
Uncle
feel,
Toms?
well, that's a whole other conversation to have. But for me, I do believe that, you know, I just don't feel like we can just shrug off things just because of people of colour saying it or doing it. You know, you can have middle-class South Asian, even Muslims, oppressing, you know, not paying their working class people in their community proper wages. To me, I have an issue
So
with
what
that.
we're really talking about here is fairness
Inequality.
or unfairness?
Yeah, for me, it's about justice, and injustice is about inequality. I'll pull up anybody. You don't have to be somebody like a billionaire or a white person. For me, injustice and injustice, like treat people correctly and treat them with humanity and dignity.
Rakib, let me come to you on this. I just mentioned Uncle Tom, the reference to America in the 18th century and slavery, and whether, in fact, black people who did what white people wanted were actually more white on the inside. And there was another terrible expression which I picked up when I lived in the United States, which was you're an Oreo, which means you're brown on the outside like the biscuit, but very white in the middle. Do you think there's an element of racism in the criticism we are hearing of Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, which has just been mentioned, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister? Are people being unfair on them because of the colour of their skin?
Well, there's other terms such as bounty and coconut as well, which have been popularised in some circles. I think what I'd say is the British political left, they would do well to stay away from those matters of identity and focus on the bread and butter of policy substance and what the impacts of the policies being implemented on the Conservative government on communities across the country. I think there's a very big debate on equality of opportunity, which would be seen by some as a classically conservative principle, but I'd still say that there's a great deal of discrimination experienced by ethnic minority people in the labour market when it comes to accessing housing. And I do think that in our politics at times that the language used is somewhat toxic. I think those are very important debates that the Labour Party should be leading on.
But would you say that what Shareefa said, that
focus...
business about apologist nonsense waffle, would you say that falls into that category?
Well, I'm not entirely sure in terms of the debate on identity. I'm just not particularly interested in it, if truth be told. As I said, when Sunak became Prime Minister, I thought it was a historic achievement for a multiracial democracy, but I still think the focus should be very much on the kind of policies he supports and he implements. And I think that's the key to mature political conversation.
I get it. Let's have a quick listen to Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, the official opposition.
I was able to say that at Prime Minister's question, which was to welcome the first British Asian Prime Minister as a real milestone for our country. And it shows that in Britain, whatever your race, whatever your beliefs, your dream can come true.
Samayya, yes, everybody has a dream, and if your dreams are different to other people, then that doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong or bad.
It's really interesting that people highlight also that, you know, Rishi Sunak has faced racism, you know, from different parts of the British public. What I wanted to also just say about anti-racism is the way that it presents, the way that representation presents in the UK today. It's not a means to an end. It simply just doesn't eradicate racism.
But are these anti-Rishi comments racist?
It depends where they're coming from, what they say. I think if people are talking about the fact that it's wrong for there to be a brown man as Prime Minister of the UK, then clearly they have a problem with the fact that he's from a South Asian background. But for people who have really sincere criticisms of his policies and the fact that, you know, his identity can be used as a backdrop to promote certain policies, then I don't think that's racist to say. In fact, that's just saying it as it is. But if representation did anything for anti-racism in the UK, we wouldn't see the levels of abuse. We wouldn't see the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, have to go everywhere with security. We wouldn't see people who are clearly racist to come out against Rishi Sunak simply because
Okay,
he's
I get a quick
he's a
word
brown
from
man.
you, if I may. I've only got time for a quick question.
Yeah,
What's it going to take for you to change your mind about him?
Nothing. My mind isn't going to change about him. For me, it's not just about what I don't expect him to do any of the things that we demand. Like, I'm not expecting him to see him at the food bank next. And to be honest, like, Conservatives posing at food banks, that's really uncomfortable as well. And I feel like there's not really much. Personally, I'm just not here to support what he stands for. And in regards to Keir Starmer, what you were just saying, he made Nadia Whitmore take down a tweet. Who is he to tell an Indian woman what she's allowed to say or not? Who is Keir Starmer to police that? And that in itself is an issue. Keir Starmer upholding Islamophobia in the Labour Party and stuff as well.
Well, it's interesting because you might have thought that this, not you personally, but a lot of people might have thought this might bring the country together a little bit when it comes to issues of race, but it appears in many cases to have done the exact opposite. Well, at least it is a talking point. Thank you very much for coming on. Good to see you two. Thank you for coming on Roundtable. Thank you for watching it. I'm David Foster, and until next time, we hope you come next time. Goodbye.